Good evening, friends, and welcome to FIFA's ongoing knowledge sharing series, where we are getting leading members of the IFA community to come and address you and share their knowledge and wisdom. As a part of this ongoing series, I'm really delighted that we have somebody like Sham Shekhar to address us. And I will now request Rupa to give a brief introduction of Sham. I'm sure this is going to be a fitting sort of a finale episode to what has been a very, I think, a very sort of a historic year in our lives, one that we will all remember all through. And maybe a lot of stories are going to be told about 2020. And I'm sure Sham will bring his years of experience and wisdom and help us with his insights. So over to you, Rupa, to introduce Sham to the audience.
Yeah. Thank you, Dhruv. Thank you. And very good evening, all our friends. It's been an honor to have Sham. And Sham is a very renowned value investor with over 3 decades of experience in financial markets. He is the founder and ideator, curator for iThought Financial Consultant LLP. He was also the past president of the Tamil Nadu Investors Association from 2012 to 2015. He is a very regular columnist of Dinamalar and Live Mint, and he also writes a weekly post at iThought. He's one of the most famous and sought after people, and we would love to hear him today. And as Dhruv said, the final play for the year 2020, which has been one of the most turbulent and the most disturbing and the most eventful years of one of our lifetime careers, if we can say. I think a lot we can learn from this 2020, and I'm sure for the next one decade, I think will have enormous amount of knowledge that we can share, we can learn, and Sham is there today. Sham, good evening. Thank you for joining, and Sham joins us from Kodaikanal, and let's hear from him. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Rupa. I'm really glad to be among all our friends. It's always a pleasure. I'm relatively a very late entrant to this profession. I call it a profession, unlike a lot of people who thinks that we are in a business. But my perspective is a profession, and it's one of the best professions because it's a profession where you can measure what you're trying to do for your investor. An investor can also see. If just doing their tax returns or something, you don't really do anything for the other person. You only record what they have done and present it to the authorities. Whereas an advisor or a distributor or whatever the regulation will call us in the future, the role that we play is the one of somebody who can measure his performance, measure his contribution, and assert his relevance towards every person whom he serves. So, in that sense, this is a profession.
Sham, if I can interpret, they're saying that your audio is little low, so if you can come a little closer and if you make thanks. Yeah.
So this is essentially a profession, and that is the most important thing that drew me to this a little late in my career. The thing which made me very interested to come to this profession is the fact that people always get conviction to be an investor in an asset class at the wrong time. So there is always a need for somebody who can ensure that those whom they advise, counsel, or assist, whichever way we choose to call, because the definitions are all changing very rapidly. So let's say we are assisting somebody, but you're still assisting them do their decisions in a more sensible way. And that need existed in 1992 That need existed in 2000, it existed in 2008, it existed in 2018, it exists in 2020, and it will exist forever. So, in that sense, people will always develop conviction based on hindsight bias, what has happened in the past, which may not be the best thing for them in the future. And that is where the role of a professional comes into play. It's very difficult not to use the word advisor, so I will use the word professional, and you can use that as a reference to an advisor or a distributor, whichever way you call it. So the professional has the capacity, the experience, the intention, and the ability to give that conviction. But you will find people coming with some conviction which they already have got from various sources. When I got into market, the sources were some tabloids like Dalal Street, Premium, whatever, Profit. I forget the names now. Then it became CNBC. Then you added more layers, ET Now, NDTV, whatever. Now you have Twitter, and you also have other things which are all quote unquote technology enabled. I don't know what technology does to behavior. That is something which I have not understood and I will not understand. So all these technology-based, investment frameworks. So all these things are the so-called assistants. But in my assessment, they are all driven by hindsight behavior. Twitter and WhatsApp are the best examples. And there will still always be a need that that kind of conviction has to be countered with a different kind of conviction. And it is the different conviction which you can deliver, which will help the person who seeks your professional help save himself. That essentially is the opportunity. To me, that opportunity will always be there before an MFD, an insurance agent, a distributor of other products, a real estate marketeer. It will be there before a financial planner, it is there before everybody. While who can do what job is something that will keep on getting redefined, there exists that role to manage conviction differently from what the herd is thinking. That is not going to change. But there is a problem. And that's a very, very big problem. And I am seeing it like a football now. More information before people makes people believe that they are informed. Having information and being informed are very, very different things. Today, snake oil salesmen are a plenty. There are plenty of guys. And they think they are giving knowledge. They actually believe that, but that's not true. They are actually putting information before people to behave in a certain way in which they want them to be. Right? This is the system. And this system is not going to be regulated from what I see. Whereas we will be very, very heavily regulated. So the only thing within our power which can make us stay relevant to the people whom we serve is how we can manage their conviction. So we have to be now more confident in what we do. We have to be very clear and very concise. If you have to tell a person that today investing in equity could be a risk and it has to be staggered, you have to have the conviction to tell him that. Similarly, you have to have the conviction to tell an investor to take a lesser return in debt investments at this point in time with a lower duration. You can't go longer now because we don't know where the things will change. So that calls for a lot of conviction within ourselves. So all the more reason why in the current context of our profession, we need to do to others only what we would do to ourselves. That alignment has to come. When you say, okay, our age may be different from the person who is the client, but you have to put yourself in his shoes. And if you were him, what you do? You have to develop a certain conviction, transfer that conviction. It is in transferring that conviction that the maximum problems lie, because that guy is getting information from everywhere and he is doing a kind of a tulabharam. He's putting you on one side of the plate, and then he's putting all this junk he has collected on the other side of the plate. And then he says that he'll form your judgment. I'll give you an interesting example. I had a client in our distribution business who has done a SIP of 6,000 from 2016, then raised it to some amount, 13, 14,000 in 2018. His total corpus today is 3 point something. He has put in only 3.2 lakhs. So one day he reached out to me on LinkedIn. He said, I'm very upset. First he said, my returns are bad. Then he said, I'm not getting enough service. So we have a system of recording when the client was last spoken to, and then a mail is sent. And then we have multiple events for which we invite all the clients. We are not discriminating. So there is a broadcast channel through which this information is given. So I went step by step to check what is the problem. Then when a client complains, I check what is the return. So I see the XIRR, not the return which mutual fund statements show. So I saw when he has given the money, every month he has given money, what is the XIRR? From 2016 to today, he had an XIRR of 16.5%. Now I was not able to understand what this guy was complaining. So I asked him again, what is your complaint? He says, I have not made enough return from the bottom of March to now. That was his first complaint. Then the second complaint was, I have lost 100 rupees in one a small cap scheme. On 3,20,000, one scheme has lost 100, and I have stopped the SIP in 2018. After 2 years, I have stopped it because I felt it is not a good thing. So people have very wrong expectations. If I had 16% return between doing a SIP, I'd be more than happy because I've beaten inflation by a clean 10%. Right? I have enough room to even lose 5-6% return or take some better risks in the future to keep my return at a fairly respectable level. But expectations are set not by us. It is set by somebody else. It is set by Twitter. It is set by, it could even be set by his bartender. So we don't know who is setting his expectations. So there lies the problem. If we, and I told my colleagues, you have failed to set the expectation for this fellow. You have thought this guy is a 3 lakh client, just a SIP client. You don't have to do anything. Gone are the days when we can avoid setting the expectation for every client. That is the first step towards managing expectation. If you fail to set the expectation, some idiot will. And then you will be answering those questions based on those expectations which are falsely set. Somebody with a risk appetite which is very, very moderate, just above the medium level of risk, can only do that much. You cannot go and buy a full small mid micro cap banking and thematic portfolio for this guy. You can only keep him within a certain band. So all these things should be done by us. We need to set the expectation for every single client. If you don't have the bandwidth and time to set the expectations of a person, don't take him as a client because he's going to become a problem for you later. So for every client, you have to set expectations. That's the first step towards managing expectations. And then periodically, you must review these expectations. For example, in 2012, I would tell a client that he could make 12% investing in mutual funds. Today, I tell them 9 is a very good number. Right? I have read, when I came to market and I was setting 12% expectation, I have read blog posts of mutual fund distributors saying that 18% is forever. Till today, he has not even taken down that blog post. Still, people are reading that and thinking that making 18% in equity is a walk in the park. So you need to review those expectations. You need to reset expectations. And you have to tell them why. when your lending rates are very high, your equity expectations can be higher. When your lending rates are trending down, equity expectations will have to trend down, and you have to tell the client that he cannot compare what is happening in one stock or one sector, or some random event he cannot compare to his portfolio returns. So the first step towards managing expectations is to set expectations. The second step is to keep revising the expectations to the economic context. There is a third important thing in this, which you must remember in managing conviction. Your conviction need not be the client's conviction. First, accept that. The client may have his own worldview. So you have to understand where he is coming from, and then set an expectation for him which will reasonably be fulfilled. I know a lot of our colleagues who are big equity bulls. They are bigger equity bulls than direct equity investors like us. But my concern with such conviction is that they will never be able to transfer that conviction to another person. And I have experienced this. My equity conviction could not be transferred to my own family members. It's very difficult. Each person, my wife may have a different risk appetite, higher or lower. My father may have another one. My mother may think that why are you putting yourself to so much stress to earn money. Each one has a different expectation of what they want from investing. So what you want from investing need not be what your client wants. So don't try to create a kind of a rigid framework in your profession. Listen to the client and then tell him what suits him. So your expectation, your conviction, and the client's conviction and his expectations, the two need not be at the same level. You please adapt to the level of the client. That will ensure the client is always comfortable. You may experience a little bit of discomfort. That is better than the client experiencing discomfort. So that is one thing which is very, very critical in managing conviction. And this is something I have learned the hard way. Like I would tell somebody, why don't you make a small investment? They would not come about with that. They will not come. When market is down, they will not come. Only when the market is up, they will come, however much I try. Then I understood this guy is a reluctant participant in equity. I have to treat him as a reluctant participant in equity and then fashion my work to suit his fears. Right? So you can never make him invest at the bottom. You can only make him invest 25% above the bottom. He will still make his 10%. So this is something that we have to adapt and we have to prepare. That's where the next step comes. The fourth step is preparation. For you to understand the client's conviction and to present him an investment proposal or to give him investment choices that will fulfill his goals in line with his conviction. There's a lot of preparation, which means if you say that I like these 4 funds, because all our fraternity, all our friends are particularly fond of certain funds, certain fund managers, certain styles. We have our biases. There's no doubt about it. But sometimes our biases may not suit the client. Then there may be a need to broaden our choices, what we offer our clients, in keeping with the client need. So when you get a different client need, go back to the drawing board, look at it afresh and develop 1 or 2 options which you can give such clients. Index investing could be one of them. Accept it. Make it his significant investment vehicle. Now you may wonder, what do I get in return? I think you get recognition and you will get reference to a client who has got a better risk appetite, who will give you the revenue. So prepare yourself to be flexible, to meet the conviction level of the client and give him solutions that match his conviction level. This is the entry point. The next step is slowly, as you deliver, you can raise his conviction level and then he will slowly come to your level of conviction. He may not reach it, but he will at least trend, giving you a little bit more space and freedom to give him better choices. When you begin with the client, accept that the client won't be ready. Though he comes to you, he's not ready. Like I know a lot of families who are never invested in equity, who will come to equity and the day one they want to make 18% return. or 24% return. I'll ask them, what are you doing otherwise? They will be getting 2% yield in real estate. But they will want, when they come to equity, they will want 18%. Because they will read somewhere, they will just see some video, read somewhere. Somebody will tell them after a few drinks. The sources of all these expectations you cannot control. The client is not ready, basically. So when he says, I want 18%, what do? Do you just give him a solution for 18%? Or you break it down and tell him 18% is not a realistic expectation. I will choose the second. I've always chosen the second. Somebody says, oh, you don't know, I know. I think the best thing is to let go of such people or allow them to make the choices. You don't make your conviction his conviction. At that level, you have to only assist him with transaction and let it be. Don't try to bring him to your level if he's very stubborn, very, very inflexible and unreasonable. So there could be a lot of people who don't have your conviction, who don't have your expectations, who don't have your risk appetite. For them, you need to go to their level. The next stage is not getting bogged down by results and returns. They're very, very important. I look at returns for every single client before I have a client conversation. It's a habit. If somebody is coming to see me or call me, or even they're doing the Zoom call, whatever, first I will see his return sheet. What have we done? And why has it been good or bad? And then I'll see which are the problem products which have done well, everything. Because in a portfolio, you'll have all sides to a portfolio. But beyond that, there is a secondary level which we have to go to. And that is going to be the future of our profession. I know the mutual funds have spoken too much about this, offering too little in return except one product, which is asset allocation product. But asset allocation goes way beyond these asset allocation products. That is what I want to tell you. Asset allocation products are the kindergarten of asset allocation, right? But you, as an experienced professional, can definitely do much, much better than that. Maybe that is going to be the survival mantra of our profession. If we are able to give asset allocation at a different level, we will be winners. I'll give you a simple example. We ventured into gold at the bottom. We gave clients 20% gold. Personally, I have a lot of gold in my investment portfolio. We have bought all these, and we bought a lot through the funds. Because fund gives you money immediately. Whereas you cannot sell SGB for big sums. It's very difficult to buy and sell. So asset allocation products are way beyond just this. You also have international equity. You've got so many other things. You've got REITs. You've got so many other ways in which you can offer products to clients. Explore them, develop domain knowledge on them, and start offering them to the discerning clients. Don't offer it to all the clients. Offer it to the client who understands the product. But the future of our profession lies in becoming experts in asset allocation and not in restricting ourselves to being managers of investment returns alone. Because when you start offering solutions, answers, and thoughts on asset allocation, your client listens to you more intently. He sees more meaning in engaging with you, and he knows that you are now far more holistic than a stupid app or a bank manager. So that is something that is the future. The next thing which I think is very important in managing conviction is how do you present your work to your client? Are you still just giving AMC sheets? Are you still just giving them the basics? Or are you presenting your work to the client in a particular way? I think there is a need to present work to the clients in a far more refined manner. And every engagement with the client where he is going to do a review, which I think should not be more frequent than a quarter, should be nuance. It should be very, it should be something which gives him value. It need not be 20 pages. Even if you're giving one page, it should be a really good one page. So you should have a template and you should be able to give him all this data. He should want to stay with you just for this. The fact that you give him everything in one place, in a simple way, in a transparent manner, and then tell him that these are the options. When you give this, you also tell him what to do next. No, that is your opportunity, right? So it's not just reporting. It is basically having a conversation that leads to the next step. By doing this, you are premiumizing your work. You are making your work different from what the client would get on his own or as part of an even bigger ecosystem like a bank. There is a need for us to premiumize our profession. When I say premiumize the way you engage with the client. It's not a question of charging more. You can still be able to charge only what you charge, but in return, when you give him a perception of giving him something more, then you premiumize. That's what I meant by premiumize what we do. The next thing is something which not many are going to take very easily. I think at the peer level in the industry, you need to have much, much bigger partnerships. Whether you consolidate or you work with specialists, I think there is no option for the distribution industry but to work with the advisory fraternity at arm's length, where each does not step on the other's feet. But I don't know how this is going to happen, but it has to happen because a lot of premiumization work can be lent by the advisory industry to the distributors without competing. That is something that can be done. And that will make the distributors' offering far more sophisticated and premiumized. For example, financial planning. I would any day have a financial planner do only the plan and not give any investment choices to the client and stop at the asset level. And then somebody else take over and do that work. That is something which I believe in. I do it for myself and I think it works for others also. So when you premiumize, you also need partnerships to help you offer a far more holistic offering to your clients. And how you're going to do it is open to you. But I think that is something which can add a lot of value to your work without putting you under severe stress and a lot of professional strain. That job can be outsourced. The next thing which I have seen in managing conviction is a very common problem. We are setting equity goals wrongly. While I make a statement, I make it responsibly and I will explain. We are setting equity goals based on the past performance. Stop doing that. If you have performance to back your product, use it only up to that point. Tell them that though the product has done well, it may not do well in the future, and set more realistic equity return goals. And in debt also, this problem is there today. A lot of debt products are bought on past performance by people, more mistakes happening on their own. But if we are part of the mistake, we need to correct it. So set longer goals, set sharper goals, return goals, moderate the goals. And by doing this correctly, you will manage the conviction of the client much better. The client will not expect more than he should. And by ensuring that he doesn't expect more than he ought to, you're cementing your relationship. There's no chance of him coming back to say, oh, you didn't tell me, or you told me something wrongly, or the sheet told me this. You would have clearly told him what to expect and what not to expect. When you do that, and you not only tell him, please put it in writing. Write 3 sentences or 4, like short mails, and do it. Tomorrow the client comes back and gives you an argument, you will say, I have said this to you. In the fear that we lose a client, let us not make the mistake of setting wrong expectation, because we will anyway lose the client. And that will be a double pain for us, because you would have served him, invested in him, and then lost him. I would rather lose him at the beginning than later. So set longer goals, set more moderate goals, set realistic goals, so that the return expectations are within what the investment can deliver. Move away from past performance. That's very, very important in this economic context. It will be more important into the future, because if we do selling based on past performance, we will keep repeatedly coming to grief with the client, and the client will make it appear that we cheated them, which is not the case. So please change that approach. That is the best thing you can do to manage the client's conviction better. When you lower his expectation, he's happier. He knows what to expect. Initially, there'll be murmurs, but finally, when you're convinced him at that point and you keep him convinced, it is easier to manage the client. The last point I want to make is about how clients should be made to manage their conviction across cycles. I have seen both from outside this profession and within this profession, client reviews happening only on 1 year investment cycle. They only look at 1 year return. Every year they want to compare with the FD. But today FD is giving 5%. Is anyone comparing? What happened to that comparison? I am not saying that either is correct. Both are wrong. The fundamental mistake is if you split an equity market cycle of 8 years into 8 1 years, the client is going to drop out in the worst year, which should be the year when he has to show the maximum conviction. You have to make clients think in a block of years. Okay, from 2017, it should have been an 8-year cycle or so. Probably from today, it should be a 5-year block or a 4-year block, not 5 or 4 single years. So the client has to invest in a block of time, a time frame, a cycle which is well defined to have adequate opportunity to deliver on his investment goals. If every year he is going to jump, he'll be happy in 2020, probably unhappy in 21, very unhappy in 22, and out of the market after that. That should not happen. So clearly set block expectations, time blocks. Start thinking in terms of time blocks. Don't tell the client next year he'll make so much return, because that is never within anybody's control. If none of us could have predicted in January of 2020 that in December the clients would be where they are. I definitely could not have. It is beyond me. So let us not try to do that. Some of us may have been right in doing that, but will go wrong the next or the year after. So it's better not to go wrong. Set longer time horizons, treat time as a block, and tell people how to handle their conviction across this block. Help them manage their conviction across this block. Keep them very comfortable with their investments. Make your reviews meaningful where the conviction grows. Work towards growing their conviction. Don't make your conviction the conviction of the client. Focus on asset allocation. That is the way in which you will make your relevance to the client permanent. Premiumize your work. Develop better trust both within your industry peers and with the clients, which means that you are going to offer them a much superior offering than what you did now by making your ecosystem broader and bigger. Set longer time blocks and don't work in 1 year cycles. So these are some of the simple ways in which you will be able to manage your conviction better, manage your client's conviction better, build conviction in people who come to you, set correct expectations, grow those expectations, moderate those expectations, do both in line with the economic cycles, and ensure that the client stays with you with a lot of comfort, a lot of psychological well-being, peace, and financial happiness. When I say this, I say it with a lot of intent, because I think that is the only reason why somebody will pay another person. It is not for transacting. So most of the people who say that, oh, why should I pay so much money for transaction, will be silenced when they are shown demonstrably that we are more than just transactors. We are people who are custodians, and we are people who can be conviction managers, and we are people who can be conviction builders, and we are people who can also grow their conviction when it is short. So that in the essence is how managing conviction can change the dynamics of our profession and take our profession to the next level, working against numerous forces like technology, disintermediation, regulatory overkill, and much more. And we will keep seeing a lot of things like this, and we have to be ready for that. To achieve that, I believe that we should first accept that we are no longer in a business and we are firmly in a profession. And if we do that, life is peaceful and we will enjoy what we do. The clients will also trust us, do whatever we do for them. That, in essence, is what I wanted to share with you on managing conviction. I'll be happy to answer questions that you may want to ask.
Thank you, Bob. Thank you so much, Shyam. You were so clear on the conviction part of it, and it really spoke. You spoke from your heart, and that's what exactly we wanted, because the team of members who are there in FIFA, all of them need this conviction for the reason, because I think most of us get lost because of, as you rightly said, about social media, television, what's written, and the client also come back to us with the same kind of the questions, and we are not able to, sometimes we are not ready for to counter that answers, because we ourselves are not, because we ourselves have to believe first to get that conviction. I think, friends, if you have any questions, please do share with us on the chat and we will ask him. I have a question to you, Shyam, because I've been interacting with a lot of MFDs across the country. One of the things after March 2020, I think most of the MFDs across, or all of us have gone through, especially me also, I also have gone through it, is a lot of clients feel direct equities today give better return than a mutual fund return, for the reason, because of, as you rightly said, of the experience after March 2020, when the markets have gone up. People are not even looking at the stocks which you had purchased 5 years back. The IRR or the CAGR return would be as much as the mutual funds. But because you have a visual which is going on and you are locked down in your house and you're only watching television and CNBC, I think people felt saying that direct equity stocks give more returns. And I think all IFAs or MFDs across the country are going through the same dilemma. So I wanted to have your view on that.
It's not new. We have seen this in 2007. We have seen this in 1999. Okay. Where are they getting their source knowledge or investment ideation from? It is from the same fund managers or or the former fund managers who are now managing private money in whatever form they do. They are not getting this knowledge from heavens. It's from the same ecosystem. So somewhere I think people want to believe that they are smarter than the market. In my experience, Mr. Market is always smarter than all of us. So I don't think sustainably somebody who has no experience in investing can beat professional managers. So today, why did professional managers not do as well in 2020? You have to ask the question.
Yeah.
Most of the guys who have not done well did some very good risk management actually. They erred on the side of caution, right? So you don't ask the question that if Reliance had not raised that money, what would have happened? It would have gone bankrupt, right? People didn't own that, and therefore they were caught out. You just understand this. One. Second, they didn't buy an expensive company, right? And they bought companies which are very, very cheap. Now the expensive company became super expensive. and the very cheap company became very, very cheap. Now, this is not new. I have seen this in every market cycle. So I have seen, I don't want to give names. In 2000, right, there was a fund manager who had a portfolio of only tech stocks. Right, today he is one of the biggest, whatever, some other manager, right? Now, there were investors in our investor group of peers, which is very well talked about in the country, who called those who questioned those investment choices as subpar. We didn't even say anything. We said these are not great investments, right? We were called quote unquote jokers in 2020. I mean, in 2000. And by the end of 2000, the same investor who called us jokers came and said, I want to invest in fixed deposit. Tell me something which is a safe investment.
Right.
I am of the view that in stock market, history always repeats. No time is any different when you have irrationality. So this time will also be no different. So in 2010, the same thing happened in infra. Like, look, I have never invested in tech stocks in 2000. I had zero investment in infra in 2008. Unfortunately, I could not sell out fully from my investments in small cap in 2017-18 because I was also performing the role of a professional. I didn't have enough time to myself, and I had not developed my ecosystem so much for myself. For my clients, we had a decent ecosystem, but I had gone beyond that. So I could only sell a good part of it, not everything. But not owning this, all these popular parts, has been what generated me superior investment returns across market cycles. So for me, this is unnatural. It was natural for me to buy Pidilite in 2009 when everybody was buying L&T on the correction. Today they are buying API companies and pharma companies on the correction. It was natural for me to own pharma funds in January of 2020, but it is unnatural to put money in 2020 December, right? But people think otherwise, so you can't help it. I think that I think we have to just watch such things pass. That's all. I don't think we should fight with our clients. That's not civilized. I don't think we should argue with them. That is also not going to lead anywhere. But we can just present our point of view, and we'll have to find who agrees with us. So it's not going to be easy doing direct equity investments. So let me explain to you that in at least two of the stocks which are highest performing stocks in this year, personally I was invested. I have made 400% return and sold it. After that, somebody has rigged it to another 100%, right? And all these clients you're talking about are got in after in this journey between my selling price and the next 100%, mostly in the last 20%, right?
Yeah.
And they think that I am an idiot because I sold early. So these things are common. We just accept it all humility and allow time to decide who is smart and who is, who is careful. So, but I don't expect that people who would have no time to invest in their investment decisions can do better than a fund manager. The fund managers are erred on the side of caution, and they have been punished. This is the first time it has happened in my experience. I have never seen fund managers be cautious and be punished in my entire investment experience. This is the first time it has happened. And I believe that this won't last. I believe that the guys whom we think are non-performers will probably be the performers of 2021. That is my sense, personally.
Sure. Thank you so much, Shyam. Why I asked this question, because your conviction makes a lot of difference to a lot of people who are hearing, because there is a disappointment in a lot of distributors' minds saying that, oh, the money is going away. So I just wanted to share this. I wanted you to answer this with conviction so that, others get this confidence.
So let me tell you this, that those who are today, everybody who's owning Reliance and who has got past performance may not do well next year.
Correct.
So the guy who is down, if you have sat with him for 5 years, give him one more year, no? Then you decide. Same time next year you decide. That is my advice. And tell your client also the same thing. Okay, if you're stuck, I'm sorry, but I have to say some names, but that's not the intention. But for lack of clarity, for want of clarity, I am telling you this. Let's say you're stuck with a Prashant Jain or somebody like that who has not done well for last 3-4 years or 5 years. who, because of a certain philosophy of value and stuff like that, give him 1 more year. That is my advice. Ensure that your client gives him 1 more year. And he's no friend of mine. I'm just telling you what I'm seeing as a professional, right? If you give 1 more year, it's worth giving, because if you're right, you will be right by miles. And let me tell you, in January, I was abused by my clients for being in pharma funds. Just understand this.
Yeah.
Yeah. Today, the same client over a glass of wine will be boasting with his friend that he owns pharma fund.
Correct.
Right? But no one remembers what he told the advisor, right? We have taken all these things. So as a professional, it's part of our game. We have signed up for this. But understand one thing, don't fall for the pressure. This is not the time to fall for the pressure. I'm very clear and I'm very emphatic in this. This is not the time to fall for the pressure. 2020 was a lovely circus, but every year will not be a circus.
Correct. Yeah. So I'll read out the questions. So the first question. Yeah.
Why do you assume MFDs are not CFP? I'll tell you why. I have greatest respect for CFPs. I have at least 3 CFPs in my office. I ensure that every employee of my mind does CFP. I reimburse their fees. So I am with CFP. So there are no two ways about it. But unfortunately, the regulator doesn't recognize CFPs. There's a problem there. I want to tell you that even in a RIA, I cannot have an advisor who is just a CFP. They want a CFA or an MBA from the most rotten college in the country. Unfortunately, the regulator has chosen to not recognize CFP. I have the greatest regard for CFPs, and I doubt if the regulator will accept that a CFP who is an MFD can give a plan. There again, I have a problem. Right? If a regulator, if I am a CFP and I choose to be an MFD, I should have been allowed to give a plan to my client. Whereas, as per what my understanding of regulation is, that is not legitimate. So it's a problem of the regulator. I am totally with the CFPs.
So there's one question from Nikhil Nayak. He writes, "Hi, can you please explain the process of review in blocks of 4 or 5 years in details?"
It's very simple, actually. So, if you look at how equity markets build into bull markets, it takes time. Let me clarify that what we are seeing is a very truncated bull market now. I don't think that the same stocks will continue to perform for a very long time to come. So we could see a lot of changes of global liquidity and stuff like that. We will see a lot of reform. So when the market settle down, you will have 1 or 2 or 3 consolidation years. So typically, you have markets build up momentum into a bull market. Like 2014, 2015, 2016, and then 2017. 2017 was the blowout. Jan 2018 was the end of the bull market. Then you had 3 years of correction. Even today, except those 100 stocks which are doing well, I don't think the whole market is doing well. Yes, market is catching up, but it's still not done as well as it was even in 2018. It's just that 100, 150 stocks which are doing well. And I credit or blame the regulator for the categorization, which I think is not a great idea. So the bull market builds time. A secular bull market takes time to build. It takes time. And I assess from where we are that it is going to be a block of 4 years. I believe, in my personal conviction, by the time this government ends its term or is into the first year of the next term, will be a significant bull market. That's what I think. If it happens sooner, well and good. Therefore, I said a block. Don't try to say with the next year's budget, you will get a budget in 100 years and then everything will be all right. I don't subscribe to such things. Like, as an investor, you have to keep the politics out of your work. So we should give ourselves time. We should give the investor time and the investments also time. So from that sense, I'm saying that it should be a block. Every time the block dimension will change. It cannot be 1 or 2 years. Please give longer block of time. What that block should be, according to the context, you adapt. Today, I personally think it should be 4 to 5 years.
Sure. Thanks, Shyam. Sham, there's one more question. I don't know whom it's. It just says telephone number. But here he writes, clients do not have a long-term attitude. You can tell them you have to be invested for 10 years, but in 3 years, they get jittery. If they don't make returns, they would like to switch to schemes. This way, the clients never ends up making money.
The first thing we go back to what I spoke. It's about managing conviction. You have to build that. Only when you build it correctly, the client will be there with you. I have had clients with me for 20 years. There have been years when we made no returns, and there have been years when we made 60% returns. So unless the client stays both years, you will not get the fruits of waiting. Patience, incremental patience is very valuable. When you have been patient for 3 years, the next 2 years is going to be it's going to be the make or break year. Like, if my clients exited pharma in January, just imagine how they will be today. The same story applies to PSU, sir. By the way, what I have seen is in thematic investing, you take 2 to 3 years or 4 years to struggle, right? You build the position, the first position. Then it tests you very badly. At the time, you just make that position back to where it was earlier. Just a little bit of upset. Let's say I build a 10% position. In the worst of the market, it comes to 7 or 8%. I take the position back to 11 or 12%. That's all. I just fill the gap, take it back to what it originally was, and add. Then, with a lag, it starts to perform. When it performs, it goes to 17, 18, 19%. Like, we had a 17.5% exposure to pharma in our RIA, and we have made 10% return in pharma alone, which over a 4-year waiting period is 2.5% of portfolio returns. So if you have 4 or 5 such decisions, your 12.5% is taken care of. So basically, there's a lot of portfolio construction math in this, but the client won't understand that. But tell him that when the chips are down, make a small investment. At least to that extent, you will be able to tell a client to make a small investment, which will work a lot. That is how you have to basically manage it. You have to make the client invest for that one extra year. See, I think any investment will take 5 years. 5 years, if you are willing to give an investment, it's good. Yes, some value schools have not performed in 5 years. I understand what you're saying. Give it one more.
So I will ask one question, the last, but let me come to the next question. It is about, is it right to hold 30-40% in debt at this point of time, even if investment horizon is 10 plus years?
It depends on the client's risk appetite, no? If he doesn't have the risk appetite, how can you take him to equity? The only thing you can do is probably reduce the debt and add a little bit of gold. That I would do happily. Because I'll tell you, if the inflation happens, gold is the hedge. So to that extent, I don't mind doing that. But if a client doesn't have risk appetite, how can I keep him in a very high equity? I won't do it. Sanjeev asked about gold and other options that can offer.
No, there's one more question. I'll read it. It talks about saying that you mentioned about asset allocation. In that, please elaborate more on gold and other options you can offer.
I think that the MFD should go beyond just selling equity products and debt products. You should get a good share of the gold portfolio of clients also, and always make them invest in gold when the chips are down. So they will anyway make money. The long-term returns on gold is 8-9%. It's a hedge against exchange rate devaluation also. So in that sense, yeah, we make less money, but we get wallet share. Today, you'll have something to show, right? If you're having gold also, when gold does well, you'll have a more wider basket of investments. You can keep rotating also amongst them according to the risk appetite, according to opportunity. So I believe that marketing gold through funds is a very, very good idea. Yes, it doesn't give us much income, but it gives us a lot of intangibles. So I think that we should build those intangibles by giving clients those products. There could be other products also which will come our way, like InvITs, like REITs. There could be other products which are very early stage. So we have to keep our mind open to learning about those products. You don't rush to sell them, but learn about them. And when you're convinced that you find one good product, start selling it. That is how you should approach it. I think the offering, what you can offer a client, you have to widen. And in that, I would also include global investments, not for the present. I think valuations are very high at the moment. But in the future, whenever uh, global investments become cheap and very attractive, at that time, even if the Indian market is not so great, you can make the client start a global investment and gradually build it over 4 or 5 years. All these things are things which we never did in the past, which are all opportunities before us to fulfill for clients. If we don't do it, somebody else will. So I think that giving a wider choice, a wider offering is very, very critical, and doing it sensibly will be able to make those choices aligned to the client's asset allocation needs. That is what I think is very, very relevant. Just because we have the product, we don't have to sell it, but where it is relevant to the client, I think you can definitely do what it takes.
So the next question comes to saying that, sir, do booking profits in SIPs, is it advisable? That's from Anurag Dodmani.
Okay, at this point, I think that if you have long-term holdings in a lot of funds which have done beyond your wildest expectation, you can take that money into cash. Only the long-term units, some part of it, how much you have to decide, and put it over a very long gestation SWP back into equity, maybe over 2-3 years. I said 4-year block, put it over 2-3 years and let it go back in. Because if this market doesn't sustain, then you would have at least taken profits out and the client will be very happy that he did something. So to some extent, de-risking makes sense. Yes, again, all these things which I tell mean we do income. So we should balance these interests in such a way that the client's interest is protected.
There is a question which is what Srinivasan from Chennai, I think, has this question. Shyam, what's your next sector which looks promising going forward?
The infra, straight. Infra and PSU are very good. Among the thematics, infra and PSU are my favorites.
And the next question is not gold at a higher level?
No, I don't think it's at a higher level. Whenever demand comes, gold will blow out and nobody knows when. So personally, I will be building a gold portfolio over the next 2 years, irrespective of what the outcome is. It's part of my asset allocation risk management. I have never done it except once in 2009, I did it. Similarly, you had a rally in 2009. You remember 2008, then you had the Lehman crash. And then between 2009 and 2011, I built a gold portfolio. 2012, I sold my gold and went back to equities. I see a similar opportunity personally. That's why I'm personally investing in gold. I think it will give us an opportunity to again get out of gold and get into equities sometime in the future. So I think gold is a must to own in the current economic context.
There's an anonymous attendee and he's writing saying that, is this a good time to invest in equities? I don't know.
Very selectively. Okay, I know it's very unfashionable to talk about value investing. It was unfashionable in 1999, 2000. It was very unfashionable in 2007 and 8 when Anil Ambani was there. And it is again very unfashionable now. It was unfashionable in 17 also. It has been unfashionable from 2017 till now. But I think that when economic growth returns, value stocks can also become growth stocks. So that part is still looking reasonably interesting. The risk reward is good, but I would not go and buy expensive stocks. Expensive equities, portfolios which are very loaded with expensive stocks, I will not buy now.
Okay, so the next question comes from Paramanand Devnani. He writes, at the current market levels, what duration of STP do you suggest? 7+ years equity investment for a 7+ year or 5-year plus?
So in addition to the STP, the client should also be able to do a few lump sums when the markets correct significantly. Like if we had built the client conviction correctly in March, April, May, some lump sum should have come from clients. If we had built their conviction correctly, we should have done it. So now if you give, let us say, a 2 or a 3-year STP, in the next 3 years, the client should also be able to give you some lump sums. Even let us say you are doing STP into a fund, which will build the fund position back to 15% of his total portfolio. Okay. The client should be able to do a lump sum of 2 to 3% when you ask for it. And you should ask for it in an extreme, market extreme, whenever things look very attractive. So the two can combine very well, and your returns over a 5-7 year block will be extremely rewarding for the client, and it will be rewarding for you also. The client is sold to you forever.
There are questions which talks about saying that should we redeem out of gilt fund. There is Mr. Vaibhav who's asked that question. And
It depends on the construction of the fund, what duration of products they're holding, stuff like that. But I think gilt fund is for people with a very high risk appetite. If your client doesn't have a very high risk appetite, it has performed very well, you can at least take part profits out. That is my suggestion. So that if there is a reversion in the direction or any air pocket in interest rates, your client will not be affected. You would have protected him. So I would definitely lower the risk of clients in gilt funds.
there's a question which talks about, do you subscribe to Balance Advantage Fund, especially at this juncture?
From a business, for asset gathering, yes. I don't, okay, my exposure to Balance Advantage Fund in my system is 0. So that answers your question. But it has been very good for people who want, who have clients with low expectation, who have 7% investment return expectation, 8% return expectation. It has been a very good product. I cannot deny that. So DRC, our clients expect more. So we have worked with clients with higher expectation. Many of the clients pay us fees in our RIA. So we cannot buy Balance Advantage for them. We create our own Balance Advantage for them, right? In the RIA, that's what we do. Even in our distribution, we do the same thing. We do the allocation shifts so that the portfolio changes. So for those who don't want to do all that, BAF is a good product.
Shyam, you basically highlighted saying that asset allocation is very important aspect of our decision-making process for our investors. Now, asset allocation basically was a topic where we only thought about equity and debt. Correct? That's the way we looked at equity and debt. And in the debt portion, we used to add gold, short-term funds, long-term funds and all. But even if you look at equities, do you think even in equities, you need to have an asset allocation between the large caps and the mid caps and the small cap? And as you also said, an index which is to be added. So if you can elaborate on that, because I think most of the focus is never on that kind of asset allocation which a distributor looks at.
It's very, very critical, especially today. This categorization has put the entire risk management on our shoulders. Actually, you don't realize. Actually, you're thinking that SEBI has made life simpler for investor and distributor and asset fund manager. No, it has made life very, very difficult for all three by saying that your investment universe has to be so small and narrow and stay within it, right? So what would happen is, whether they like it or not, fund managers are going to own businesses despite being overvalued, right? So the only thing that will happen is the market will correct the valuation.
Correct.
No one can change it, right? The only person in whose hands this opportunity is there is the distributor, actually, the professional who's going to help the client manage it. So therefore, we need to definitely change your mixes according to opportunity, and you need to be very vigilant about that. So you need to layer, for example, what should be the index. So there are multiple layers. You have an index, then you have a large cap fund, then you have a multi-cap fund, then you have a thematic fund like a mid-cap or something like that. And lastly, you have the global fund. This is the 5 things I can say in equity. Then you have the Balance Advantage fund if you want. I don't know where you'll position it, but in my thought process is not there. But it is there in the ecosystem and I respect it. So you have to keep arranging that. So today, let's say somebody has made a lot of money in the Nifty. From index fund to BAF may be a good shift.
Okay.
Suppose somebody has made a lot of money in mid cap. You want to take some money off. Wherever you want to book profit, you can put that money in BAF and later take it back into your other products also. That is possible. Because the client won't be happy to see a 20% minus. I'm very clear about that. From here, if the portfolio goes down 10%, he won't be able to take it 10 or 20%. So therefore, from that point of view, you can use safety nets. You should use safety nets. So I gave the hierarchy. So in that hierarchy, I don't know where you will position BAF, but wherever you position it, you can use a BAF or a liquid or a floating fund or whatever you want to choose as your lowest risk option. So whenever you want to lower the risk, you can move it up to that point straight.
Sure, thanks. There is Srinath Vijay who just writes saying that while suggesting large caps and large and mid caps and ESG based investments for the next 2 years, be worth.
Sorry, can you repeat that question?
Yeah. So the question is, while suggesting large cap and large and mid cap and ESG based investment for next 2 years be worth?
He's asking whether I am suggesting.
Yeah, no, he's saying that is it worth it?
2 years is, in my view, 2 years is a very short gestation from the present. I think we need a longer gestation. 2 years is a very risky period to suggest products, particularly in equities.
So there is a question from Nisreen Mamaji. She writes, what CRM do you suggest which includes reviews?
See, we are still testing these things. We are still testing at least 2 CRMs. That's not something where I have really made up my mind. So I think you should ask somebody who's a better expert on that. But yes, there is a need for a CRM, especially if you want to have more clients and we want to work in a structured way. A CRM is a must. That is something I think we should have a lot of discussion on this because people who have used it and who have succeeded with it must tell it. I am yet to get to the top of it.
Sure, thanks. Shyam, I just wanted to share and ask you, saying that, that over the period of time, people talk about compounding, right? It's the eighth wonder of the world. And I think this industry, the mutual fund industry, has compounded huge amount of wealth in the last 20 years or 2 decades. I think it's been I think there is something called as a folio return and a fund return, and the fund returns have compounded and given very good returns over a period of 20 years. What do you believe, and do you still believe, saying that when you invest for an investor, that compounding factor is very important to be discussed with investors?
As far as India is concerned, I think for the next decade or two, we should take the full power of compounding and its benefits. We should capture it. I think the opportunity is before us. So as the economy matures, maybe the opportunities are slow. But for the next 1 or 2 decades, I think the opportunities are very, very huge and they're going to keep coming at us. So I see no reason for us to question the power of compounding. And I see no reason for us to take near-term biases into these expectations. Something like, 2020, great year, but actually it's a trading year. It's not an investment year at all. So the investment years are ahead. They're ahead. That's what I want us to, all of us in this meeting, to be cognizant. If you miss this trading year, it's not the end of the world. You are not signed up to create. You're not a magician, so you are like a instructor. Nobody can get a six-pack in 6 weeks. So your client will take time. Compounding is a game which is a 3, 4, 5 year game from here. So if they started in 18, it is a 7, 8 year game. So that is the point I'm trying to make. And I am not trying to make this with any excuses for anybody. I genuinely believe it takes that time.
So normally compounding takes 10 years plus kind of a time period, but we need to have the conviction to hold on the investors, because compounding comes in a very lumpy way. It doesn't come linear.
Yeah, I will tell you, I picked a stock in 2001 at the bottom of the bear market at 25 rupees. The seller was a mutual fund. Seller was a mutual fund, who's a very reputed mutual fund. The stock started returning money after 7 years.
Wow.
Right? And then in the next 7 years, it went up 300 times. So if I made my judgment in 5 years, what would have happened to me? So all these 100-bagger companies, or 30-bagger, 20-bagger, no story is sub 5, 6 years. Nothing is below 5 years. Unless you are this lucky guy who bought the ticket, the boarding pass, and sat in the flight, all this happened in 20 minutes. How many flights can we catch like that? Tell me that. It's very rare, right? So things like that. Waiting is a part of making returns, and longer waits are just bad luck. I will say it's. I mean, you're too early to the party. You have to wait for the party to start. You don't go back. It's like that. Compounding is like that. So if you are early, bad luck, tough luck. That's about it. I don't think we should judge ourselves. I mean, I don't think one should do that.
Sure. Dhruv, I've asked quite if you want to share something.
So how much time we have, Rupa? I think
I think
Shyam-
as well, Shyam, if you can, how much time can you still more spare with us?
Another 10 minutes.
Yeah, okay.
So I think it's been a wonderful session. I think a lot of insights. And I think before we let Shyam go, so I think one question I think which will help all of us, what you I think mentioned in your earlier comments, a lot of information available, but more information doesn't mean you're informed.
Yes.
And I think if we have to be professionals, and I think that's where our role comes to be, to become more informed. So what are some of the things you could, guide all of us, that what is it that we need to do on a regular basis to become that more informed, more in a position, to be able to give the right advice?
I think FIFA should have a knowledge management group of small set of people who are a knowledge management group who will disseminate issues after their quick deliberation and tell the peers and the colleagues what they should know about each issue, and say that these are not the official view of FIFA. This is just the official view of a co-opted set of independent professionals. And I think you should institutionalize a knowledge dissemination, especially for the distributor fraternity, who I think have been most abused in the recent years and who have suffered too much of regulatory discrimination. I think that the only way you can bridge that gap is through knowledge and make the distributor more informed than advisors, than those who do it on their own. That's the only answer. I think we should have a ginger group which works and shares information. That's very easy. We do it within organizations, right? So
Right,
here,
right.
there should be a community approach. That is what I think. And put young people in that so that they have the enthusiasm. And because I think that sharing should start very early in a person's career. So put the sub 30 guys and they should get all the older people and handhold them. I think these are things which, see, when people give a community without expecting, they grow phenomenally. They don't realize that. I mean, I've experienced that in my life, and I think I believe firmly in that. And that's what makes me continue to engage in all these, whatever way I can. And I think you should put the sub 30 guys, pick the bright young ones, and make them responsible for giving responsible information to the fraternity.
Okay. Wonderful. That's a very, very suggestion. I'm sure we'll take it up and create this. And thank you once again. And to everybody on this chat, I think there was a lot of learning from me. I think I'm really thankful as a lot of pearls of wisdom Shyam has shared with us. I think most importantly, what he told us is that set the expectations. That's our first job with every client. That will help us in managing expectation, review periodically with every client, understand every client's expectation, and of course, our conviction. I think the biggest learning, and I truly sense that now, I realize that I am struggling. I was myself struggling that why I'm not able to translate my conviction to my clients. And I think what Shyam has given me to understand that understand your clients, listen to them. Everybody might not be having your expectations, your conviction, but you need to help them in that journey. And I think the motto of FIFA, that Sarthi Zaruri Hai, our tagline, we need to become Sarthis and we need to, guide them, understand. That's very important what he told us. I think very important point that he has brought to us is the future in this business is going to be about asset allocation. We need to become experts in the domain various domain knowledge. We need to expand our knowledge about other offerings, whether it is REITs, whether it is international funds, whether it is InvITs. We need to create, templates for reviewing clients' portfolios. And I think very importantly today, I think what is mentioned that in today's context, we must revise the expectations of the clients in terms of returns going forward, both in equity as well as debt. That is, we must be upfront with the clients. I think at the start of 2021, I think it's a very important message that we should communicate with our clients, prepare them for the future returns. And I think, again, a very important suggestion, which to look in terms of blocks of year. Investing and compounding is going to happen over the next decade. He's indicated that India is going to benefit from compounding, but we need to look at it from, a perspective of a few blocks of years. And finally, I think what touches my heart is that we are in a profession, and let us build our community, which are, recognized as true professionals. And I think that is one of the motto in FIFA, that we want this community to be known as, the most excellent professionals in this field. And I think today's session from Shyam, I think whatever he has given advice or his inputs will help us in, becoming truly professionals. So with these words, thank you very much, Shyam, once again for addressing us, taking out your valuable time. Wish you a very happy new year, and all the friends and all the FIFA community from the board and the executive committee. I, wish you a very happy new year in advance and all the best. And I request you to send us your feedback on this session, as well as on any other suggestions you have at FIFA. And I think this suggestion of Shyam is something that I look to take it up in 2021. We will create this knowledge center. I think it's very important, and we will act upon it. So thank you, Rupa.
Thank you, Shyam. Thank you, Shyam. But as you rightly said, Dhruv said, we wanted to have that knowledge sharing institutional, and we would like you to be a part of it so that you can guide us, which your experience also in the last 3 decades will help all the MFD fraternity here. So we would love to you be a part of it.
I am always there to help, but my focus totally is in blooding somebody else as a leader, more young people.
We will do that.
I'm always there to help. But when we make the young people do it, then it gives us greater joy than
absolutely.
So I'm always there to help.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Shyam. Wish you a very happy new year, and thank you for this absolute excellent, insightful kind of your thoughts that you shared. And I could see the conviction when you spoke from your heart, what your conviction, and thank you once again. And thank you all our FIFA members, everyone. Wish you a very happy new year, and hope you're all safe and well. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, Shyam. Take care.